afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. For those who find it to be a holiday, happy Valentine's Day. My name is Patty Mulvihill. I'm the Executive Director for the League of Oregon Cities. Welcome to this Friday's legislative webinar. Most of you are probably old hat at this, but if you haven't already, please make sure that you're muted throughout the duration of today's webinar. And also, please make sure that you change your identity so it lists what city you represent. So for today's legislative webinar, we've got about 7 topics that we want to go through with you today. The first is House Bill 2138. This is the governor's middle housing bill. And we're going to touch on that one first today. Then we're going to discuss a request that we received from the co-chairs of the Joint Ways and Means and Economic Development Committee. They're requesting information on city infrastructure projects. We'll talk again about Senate Bill 916. This is relating to unemployment insurance during a strike or labor dispute. You heard an update on this last week. We need to tell you some stuff again this week. Senate Bill 473, which will create penalties, criminal penalties at that, for threats made against public officials. We'll get an update from our legislative director on where things stand with the 2025 transportation package. And then we'll talk again about House Bill 3556, which seeks to provide greater flexibility to cities for how they use their transient lodging taxes. And we'll tell you what little we know about some things related to the president's executive orders and some litigation that's transferring about that. So for those of you who haven't joined us before, please remember that we hold all questions until the end. So if you're somebody who thinks you'll forget a question, please know that you can raise your virtual hand or you can put the question in the chat. When we get to the Q&A segment, staff and I will do our best to make sure that we take questions in the order in which they're received. So we're going to start today right off the bat with the governor's middle housing bill. That's House Bill 2138. Alexandra Ring is our housing and land use lobbyist. I see Alexandra popping her camera on. Alexandra, what can you tell us about this bill and how we think it might impact our cities?
So this has been it's in the vein of many of the bills we've seen come forward from the governor's office previously. For those of you who are familiar with her previous middle housing bills, this is supposed to be a continuation of some of that work. I know, many of our cities, including folks on this call, participated in some of the work groups that the governor's office held over kind of the interim to discuss the provisions of this bill. We finally have -1 amendments back that address, many but not all of the city concerns. The governor's office has asked for feedback on the -1 amendments, and they're accepting that feedback through the end of next week. I'll be helping to compile city feedback. If you have not yet seen those documents, I will admit that they are rather complicated. Shoot me an email. I will put my contact information in the chat because there's a whole way to read them. There's 3 separate documents. It's rather confusing. But we're hopeful we can get to a place where at least folks don't really have any feelings about this bill. Many of the most major concerns around traffic impact analyses and that remain to be addressed, but there is no longer a prohibition on downzoning.
Alexandra, for those who may not have been tracking this, what's the intent of the governor's middle housing bill?
Excellent question, and I should have covered that. It's to make the building of middle housing, so this would be duplexes, triplexes, cottage clusters, townhomes, easier to build, less, cost burdensome for developers, and just kind of easier to do infill on smaller lots, things like that.
And you mentioned some initial concerns from cities have been addressed. What outstanding concerns are there that our members should be aware of?
The primary outstanding concerns will be those traffic impact analyses. They intended to fix it in this bill or in this draft, but they were unable to. And so there'll be kind of ongoing discussions about that particular provision. And then additionally, there are some ongoing discussions about some of the changes to definitions that they're making to middle housing types. I think, brought forward have been a number of concerns surrounding, the bill allows for detached or attached cottage clusters, townhomes, and duplexes/triplexes, which makes it rather hard to distinguish for our developers and also our planning departments what is what. There have been folks pushing for more of a, if we're going to do this, more of a housing type agnostic approach and just saying you can have this many units on a lot rather than trying to dive into what we call them.
Thanks. I only have 2 more questions. Sorry. So you mentioned the traffic impact analysis may still be a concern. For those who haven't read the bill, what specifically should we be concerned about when it comes to traffic analyses?
As currently written, the bill, even the -1, prohibits traffic impact analyses for any middle housing land division. So if you are putting in 100 units of middle housing land division, kind of greenfield development, you would be prohibited from doing a traffic impact analysis under the current draft of the bill. I think the governor's office has admitted that's an unintentional oversight. I don't think it was not the governor's original intention, seemingly, to allow for middle housing land divisions to be used for greenfield development, for large scale developments. They were thinking purely in terms of infill, where you're looking at like up to 8 units. They were originally thinking in the -2 or in the -1 that they were going to change that to, traffic impact analyses are prohibited for up to 8 units. I think there's been some additional discussions since then that say even that might be a little tricky for our cities that have, recently annexed land, things like that, that would make that, harder when you don't have any kind of infrastructure surrounding those.
Okay, my last question, you mentioned the governor's still seeking feedback. Do you want the feedback to go directly to the governor's staff or do you want it to go to you?
Send it to me. I will be helping to compile it. You are also welcome to send your feedback to the governor's office, but trying to do this in such a way that we can kind of have one voice, one kind of concentrated effort, just so that we can, and I can work to ensure that everybody's voices get heard on this one. And I'll put my contact information in the chat so I can send folks the 3 documents and the instructions of how to read those documents.
Thank you, Alexander. So just to be clear, if you've got questions or concerns about the governor's middle housing bill, please email those to Alexandra. She's going to drop her information in the chat. And if you want to expedite it so she actually knows what she's looking for in the subject matter, if you could even just put governor's middle housing, that would be super helpful when you send her your feedback. So I know that we're getting some questions in the chat. Just remember, we'll get to those at the end of the day. We're going to pivot away from legislation to a request that we got from some co-chairs. So I'm going to ask LOC's water wastewater lobbyist, Michael Martin. Michael, thanks for coming on. Michael, what's the request we've been given and what do you need our members to do?
Yes, the request that we've been given, Patty, is that please contact your own legislator and ask them to have a conversation with the 4 co-chairs. There is a bulletin article that outlines the specific request, but we need all of our cities to contact your state legislators and advocate for infrastructure funding. So there's the 4 co-chairs of the Joint Ways and Means Committee and the Subcommittee on Transportation and Economic Development. So without this funding, I think you all know very well, we can't improve essential infrastructure and facilities. And so these conversations will really help ensure that there is a robust amount of funding going forward with infrastructure. So please contact your legislator, ask them to have a conversation with the 4 co-chairs. This is all outlined in our bulletin article. And there's even a little sample that you can use if you just want something quick and easy, and then share just like a brief story of your own infrastructure needs. So that's the request.
Thanks, Michael. One quick question. Are they looking for what I would call ready to build infrastructure projects? Like we have the bids, we have the quotes, we know what we need? Or is this even like, I know I need a new water treatment facility and initial rough estimates are 10 to 12 million. Do they have a preference for what they are looking for?
The broad preference, I mean, really related to housing and, any connection you can make. I reference in our bulletin article, the Water Caucus co-chairs put together a survey that many of you filled out. So it's water needs related to infrastructure. So anything that you can tie to housing is really the biggest need. So it's all fair game.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. And if people have any questions about whether or not they should submit something, can they work through you?
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So we'll
Thank you.
Back to some actual legislation that's pending, not just a request for you guys to do something. And we're going to pivot back with Scott Winkles. He's our general government lobbyist. Scott's got 2 bills. One we talked about briefly last week, which is Senate Bill 916, which deals with unemployment. during strikes, but a new one, Senate Bill 473, which should hopefully speak to most of us because it should give us an opportunity to impose criminal penalties for threatening behaviors against public officials. So Scott, I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm just going to let you take both bills and maybe pepper you with questions if I hear anything.
Okay, cool. Again, Scott Winkles. I'm starting, this is my 10th long session as your lobbyist in the general government portfolio. I'll start with Senate Bill 473. It was an honor to testify on this bill on your behalf, but it is sad that the bill is necessary. What the bill will do is create a criminal penalty for threats against public officials. Right now, the bill's got a pretty narrow definition of public officials. So for purposes of our members, it would be your elected city councils and appointed officials. The bill starts out at an an A-level misdemeanor, and then it would escalate to a C felony for repeated offenses. Testifying in support of the bill, besides the League, Association of Oregon Counties were there, City of Eugene. The bill was actually printed at the request of the City of Eugene and the Oregon Judicial Department, and they had a family court judge who describes a very harrowing experience requesting the bill. The hearing, as is typical in the legislative process, did identify a few issues and concerns with the legislation, and he's asked us to meet privately in a group to sort of work out some of those technical issues with the bill. That'll be staffed by the Judiciary Committee's legal counsel, so looks good. I think one of the issues that was identified for the district attorneys is that they would be conflicted in most of these prosecutions, so they're asking that the case these crimes be cited into Department of Justice, or that DOJ have exclusive jurisdiction. My read on that is that's probably a good thing, because this conduct could be charged under a few different crimes depending on the circumstances. And so if there's a resource issue at your local DA's office, there's another venue that a city could go to in order to seek some redress. There was some also comments from committee members regarding First Amendment issues that we do need to tackle, and the scope of the bill, with one committee member indicating that it seemed narrow. So we're certainly happy to talk about all those things. What the ask for the members is today is, it's a little sensitive because we're always careful when we talk about this issue, because we never want to say anything publicly that's going to trigger additional harassment or threats to members. So if you have a story that you would like your legislator to know, I would ask that you call your senator and explain your situation. And we're really looking for scenarios where someone has actually threatened your safety, not someone mad because of something, or even if they're irate, where that you credibly felt that your family's safety was put in danger. Tell your story, let everybody make that decision for themselves. But we would ask that you convey those privately with your senators. That's where the bill is, and ask that this bill move. So that's where we are in 473. I think it's got legs.
Before you move, since it has legs, you mentioned that there's at least one member who's concerned that the scope might be too limited. What's your thought on getting potentially the scope enlarged to include maybe actually city staff, particularly those that are constantly perhaps being threatened, city managers, city recorders, people who have direct face-to-face contact with the public? Is there any room for expansion of the scope there?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are a few definitions of public official we could use that would be that would expand that. I think we've heard, and I saw a comment in the chat from city manager. I'm aware of instances where city managers have in fact been credibly threatened, and so getting that expanded to that broader list is certainly something we can talk about, and that seemed to be important to at least one of those judiciary members.
Thanks, Scott. And I'll let you go on to Senate Bill 916.
Okay, Senate Bill 916. This bill, we talked about it last week. We sent out an alert. It's in the bulletin again this week. If you have not had a chance to talk to your senator directly about this bill, I urge you to do so. The legislation will allows a individual involved in a labor dispute, which is likely broader than simply a strike, to receive unemployment benefits. This bill will disrupt the balance in labor negotiations. Right now, both sides, both management and labor, have risk going into the contract negotiations. If one side is able to collect unemployment insurance after their first week out on strike, then that balance is shifted and one side has less risk. For us, that means disruptions to public services. The bill was scheduled for an informational hearing. That's when the legislative committee wants to get very specific information, so they invite a set list of witnesses. In this case, it was the employment department, so they could ask questions about the implementation of the bill. We expect that informational hearing meeting has been rescheduled. We think there could be an additional hearing, so we have time. I think there are cracks showing in the support for this bill. So whatever conversations you can have with your senators to explain why this bill is, one, unneeded and how it would disrupt services would be phenomenally helpful. I think if you're paying attention to the space last week, we had there was a unit out close to on the verge of a strike, settled before they went out. I think within a few hours or days of the actual strike deadline. I know that creates a lot of stress and tension, but that's really how this works. People get to the point where they have risk, and that risk gets real, and then that's where you can craft that solution. So we have a pretty good labor relations system in the state. We could use some improvements, but this is certainly disruptive. So please call your senators.
And Scott, I know you want our members to call their senators, and I'm sure that everybody on this call will, but do you need them to communicate any concerns directly to you, or do you feel like you have a handle on where things are?
I think if you hear in those conversations, you hear any feedback from your members, from your legislators that is interesting, or you think I might find interesting, please forward those on to me as well. Excuse me.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, we're going to pivot to our legislative director. I think a lot of you have indicated that transportation is one of your number one concerns, particularly how we're going to fund it. So I'm going to ask Legislative Director Jim McCauley to jump online and give us an update on where things stand with the potential 2025 transportation package. Jim, what do we know?
Yeah, hello everybody, and I'm going to go right off camera because I've got some issues with some bandwidth where I'm at, but stay tuned to at least the verbal side. So yes, transportation, very important package for cities, counties, and I think for a lot of people in this entire state. We knew going into this session, it was going to be extremely difficult to get a robust package on the scale of what the need is out there for both cities, but also for a lot of the state facilities. There's been an awful lot of noise over the last week or two with significant concerns over voting for a tax hike or concerns over ODOT's management of their programs. I think the most important thing I can offer at this point is to get yourself through the noise and to really truly focus on your messaging with legislators and make sure they understand how important this transportation package is to cities that are out there. The survey work that you have all participated in is showing that 40% of the city roads that are in place right now are in poor or very poor condition. And we can't continue to let those conditions get worse. And if the state does not come up with a robust package, we're going to continue to look at a decline in those road conditions at this point in time. So what we're really asking for is to really start that momentum effort right now, build that education with your local officials, make sure they understand the importance of this package. When you have examples in your own community or can provide them with information on how you're spending the money and where you are short, That is probably the most important part of what you can articulate in your advocacy at this point in time. I've talked about this before, but this will be a session-long conversation, and we can't wait until the end of the session to build momentum for support. We need to make sure that this is bipartisan going forward, and there's no time like the present, essentially, to make sure you make this case. And I know part of what Michael shared earlier was, again, infrastructure. We were successful in 24 getting the state to participate for the first time in local infrastructure funding. And we need to continue on with that message going forward for the remainder of the session. And again, there's an article in the bulletin this week that you can follow up with some additional detail and some messaging. So thanks very much, Patty.
I got two follow-up questions for you, Jim. And one of this is because I tried to sort of gracefully cover your stuff last week when you couldn't be on. And there was a question about local funding for local roads potentially being at jeopardy with the package. And I know that you answered some one-off emails this week, but for the membership who's on today, how are we feeling about any potential hits to what cities rely upon in the transportation package?
It's a good question. I'm feeling better than I did a few weeks ago. I think some of that whispers, I will say, around the Capitol about maybe just doing a transportation package for the state facilities, I think that's gone away a little bit. But that's one of those key message points, I think, continuing to go forward is for the legislature to understand that this transportation package essentially has to unify all transportation systems in this state. That means state level facilities, city level facilities, as well as the county road system as well. You can't just find one portion and expect a transportation system to function well.
Thanks. One more, Jim. You mentioned this is going to be a session-long conversation, and we're probably not going to see this wrapped up to the end of the year. What do you need from our members throughout that year? Is this a one-and-done phone call to legislators? Is this every couple of weeks to the legislators? What, in terms of grassroots advocacy, do you need from our members on this particular package?
Yeah, thank you for that. Definitely not one and done. If you haven't had the conversation with your legislators about transportation, do it now and make sure that you have follow-up. And part of that follow-up needs to probably be a little bit more detailed. So talk to them about where you're short with your operations and maintenance program. So statewide, that number is really big. $633 million is the shortfall that we've been able to determine from all cities. And your own shortfalls are probably measured in the 10s or 20s, or for some of the larger cities, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars going forward. So yes, that message needs to resonate from here to the end of the session.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. Next, we're going to pivot to Jenna Jones, who has the privilege on working on one of the league's top legislative priorities this year, which is House Bill 3556, where she's doing her best to get you all some flexibility with how you use your transient lodging tax dollars. So Jenna, what do we need to know about TLT this session and House Bill 3556?
Yeah, so I think I talked about this on our very first legislative call, and we hadn't gotten a bill yet. So there are 7 other TLT related bills. So wanting to cut through the noise and tell you that our bill is House Bill 3556. It dropped this week. It's got bipartisan sponsorship. It is currently being referred to the House Emergency Management, General Government, and Veterans Committee, which is not typically the committee we see tax bills go to. So couple of things. First, what the bill does is the bill is really trying to get more flexibility in our allowable uses for the 70% preempted funding under the TLT. So allowing for tourism impacted services to be funded. That includes public safety, so police, fire, EMS, and also community infrastructure. So your critical infrastructures, water, wastewater, transportation, but also things that your tourists use, your public parking lots, your public restrooms, beach maintenance or trail access, parks, that kind of thing. So as you've probably heard me in many venues of the LOC since we adopted this priority, transient lodging tax is a very controversial topic. So I think start now on talking to your legislators if you need that flexibility in your community and what that additional funding could bring for you to balance the like impacts of tourism on your community and benefit everyone by keeping your roads safe, keeping police and fire able to respond, and to make sure everyone has different community amenities to enjoy. So that's the first thing, is what it does. Reach out if you have someone on this committee, which are now the committee members are listed in the chat. Please reach out to them. They are a target demographic. They don't know anything about transient lodging tax, and so we got to bring them up to speed. There is one coastal legislator on there that will probably have some idea of what's going on, but we have to go there first and have a public hearing and a work session to move the bill to House Revenue, where the revenue nerds know about transient lodging tax, and we've brought them concepts for the last couple of years. But we really need to start building the coalition of all legislators around this concept, because the Oregon restaurant and lodging industry, they don't like this concept at all, and they really want to protect the 70-30 split as it is right now. So the more support we can get, the better. And also, if you want to share examples of like what you could spend your money on, send those to me. My email is in the chat. We did a survey over the summer that kind of got some of those qualitative answers from you, but always happy to hear more, or some of the things you wish you could partner with your business community, whether it be your hoteliers or your restaurants, to benefit tourism.
Thanks, Jen. I got two questions. The first is going to be long before I actually get to the question part. So you mentioned that the bill is controversial, specifically ORLA, the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association. And we've heard from some of our members, you and I, that they're receiving outreach from ORLA and others about opposing the bill. Do you have any counter arguments or data? So if our members receive kind of an opposition push, that we can kind of counter some of the data?
Yeah, so I think a big thing that I've been hearing from folks that have gotten stuff from Orla is, one, there's a concern that LOC doesn't actually keep track of what cities are spending on this. The state houses that data. There are lots of great resources that if you email me, I'm happy to give you a link to the state's hub of all of the TLT data that they collect on revenues and rates. So we leverage them for that. There's been some conversations about, well, cities are just sitting on money waiting for this change to happen, instead of, some cities have really nice convention centers and tourism related facilities and don't really have to do much promotion because they live in a high tourist area. And there's no reason from a good fiscal steward of community money to put it towards anything else. So cities' hands are tied, and they have things that they would love to spend to benefit their community and tourists, but that's not what we have. I think the other issue is people get really stuck on the 70-30 split. Yes, that is from 2003 to now. That is over 20 years. Most cities have raised their transient lodging tax in that time. Before 2000 distributions, and we still see in state data that the highest spent use is on promotion. So we know where the money is going, and it's still very, very restrictive.
Last question.
And one last point is, I hear from Orla a lot, if cities just work with their local hoteliers or their local destination management organization, they can do anything flexible. I think what we really want is clarity in the law, because there's been a lot of lawsuits from Orla that have narrowed definitions. Like there's a DOJ opinion that facilities do not mean roads. It does not mean water systems. It doesn't mean any of those other infrastructure. It means an actual building that lasts for more than 10 years.
Thanks, Jen. I got a technical question. You mentioned that there's maybe 6 other TLT bills out there. Do the members need to concern themselves with those right now, or just kind of focus on 3556?
I would just focus on 3556. The other ones out there are a mix between local and state TLT bills. I don't see any of the other local bills moving because 2 of the sponsors are sponsors on our bill. So they have chosen this as the pathway forward. So the other ones are kind of irrelevant at this moment.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. I appreciate it. So the last thing we're going to give is what we know thus far on any impacts from some of the president's executive orders. Excuse me. Actually, we're gonna go to Q&A because I need to mute myself. So if you have any questions, can you put them in the chat? Okay, I've got two questions. One is from Julia Hedgeck from Staten. Alexandra, it's a question from you on House Bill 2138. I don't know if you can see it in the chat, Alexandra. It's up towards the top. She was asking, I believe, about the transportation analysis. Is it a requirement to do a TIA or to do it at all?
Sorry, I'm having some technical issues here today. It would be a prohibition on TIAs or traffic impact analyses for middle housing land divisions of a certain size. I think what that size is and what the parameters are that are put around it is up for debate. I think for many of us, we would love to not see a prohibition at all, because even, you know, a couple of units are going to affect your traffic.
Thanks, Alexandra. I apologize. I have no idea what happened with my throat. I do see one more question before I pivot to it. On the executive orders, we don't have a lot to update you on. The short answer is there's still the executive orders out there. Most of you have expressed concerns related to federal funding freezes or immigration. Those executive orders and subsequent memorandums from agency officials at the federal level are all being litigated. Lawsuits are going left and right. The feds are suing cities and states. Cities and states are suing the feds, and we don't have any real resolutions on those. What we did learn this week from our partners is that we have started to see actual funding, federal fundings go from pause to actually canceled. So we know of a few counties who were advised this week that they were moving from a pause status, meaning the federal government was reviewing previously allocated federal dollars, and they have actually since subsequently terminated that funding. So I say this to say that if you have city money or if you have federal money that you're relying on for your city and you're in a pause status, make sure that you're still following up. And if you haven't already clicked on the form from the National League of Cities, which is trying to develop a comprehensive list of funding that has either been paused or terminated, please make sure that you do. And if you switch, if all of a sudden you get a notice that your funding is no longer being paused, that it's actually being terminated, please let NLC know. And also please let me or Jim McCauley know. We are actually going to Washington, D.C. in about a month. We have a meeting with the government affairs team for the White House while we're out there. And if you see that you're starting to lose your federal dollars, we'd like to be able to talk about that if we're given an opportunity from the White House's lobbying team. So we do know that at least at the county level, we're starting to see some actual funding being canceled. The second thing is with the announcement of federal workforce layoffs. This will probably hit some of our rural partners more. We learned again yesterday that they are expecting to lay off federal officials that work in the wildfire firefighting process, not necessarily actual firefighters, but those that provide support in clearing of vegetation. We obviously have strong concerns about that given what happens every summer here in Oregon, and that there's also been some layoffs of predator control enforcement officers, which could again impact some of our partners in rural communities. That's all that I really know right now. We are trying to track this weekly. What I would say is if you have specific questions or a new concern has arisen, the best course of action is to either email me or Jim McCauley, and we can try and talk either with our federal delegation or our federal lobbyist partners at the National League of Cities and try and get you some answers. But the important thing really now is we need to know if you go from pause to termination on your federal funding, so we can try and give you whatever support we need. So let us know. We're going to be tracking any more federal layoffs and how they could or could not impact your communities. We're doing the best we can to stay on top of stuff that seems to pivot every day. So that's what we've got in terms of an executive order update for you. There is another question waiting in the chat. Scott, this one's for you. It comes from Jennifer Jolly. She's asked if you still need logos to support your efforts on Senate Bill 916.
Yes, that would be great. We're at this point, we've when we're lobbying, we collect logos for a couple or three different things. One is it's a one pager. It's a document we use to leave in offices, and we're talking about a bill. There's also formal testimony that gets submitted on the record and hearing, and the final reason would be for the floor letter. And the floor letter is something that gets delivered to the legislators on the day of the vote. We're collecting for those floor letters now. I think the one pager has already been published, and then we can't submit any more for hearings. But if you do have a logo, you want to lend your support to our efforts to derail this bill. please send it my way.
Thanks, Scott. If we have any more questions, you can either raise your virtual hand or you can put something in the chat. Those questions can be about anything that the lobbyist presented on today. It can also be something unrelated. So if you've got a legislative concept or a bill that you're interested in, please feel free to raise your hand virtually or put a chat in the chat and we can see if we can get those answered for you. I'm not seeing any, and in the event that anybody is furiously typing, I will just remind everybody that we're here every Friday at noon. We also have follow-up and more substantial materials on legislative matters that will have directly impacting your communities every Friday in our bulletin. If you're new to working with the legislatures, you can always access our Legislative 101 toolkit that can be used by you guys in your communications with legislators. And also of importance to know is this week we open registration for our spring conference. That's May 1st and May 2nd at the Mill Casino in North Bend. I would note that the last few years, our spring conference has proven more popular than we had hoped and space is at a premium. So if you are thinking about it, we do encourage registration as soon as possible. One, to make sure that you can actually get into the conference, and two, to make sure that you can get the hotel room of your preference. You can find registration details on our website at www.orcities.com. And I have one question in the chat from the city of Huntington. I've put in capital funding requests. When would I find out about those requests? Jim, I'm going to kick that one to you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So if it's a state level, and I'm assuming that's what the question is here, is I would reach out to your legislator who you filed that capital funding request to find out where the status is at. Typically, the vast majority of those budgetary decisions are not made until literally the last few weeks of session as they're putting together the final budget and after they've received the final revenue forecast. So yeah, it's going to take some time, but it's important for you to probably be checking in on them.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to do one last call, 5 seconds. If you've got a question, I need to see your hand or see it pop up in the chat. If not, for those of you who care or track, LOC offices will be closed on Monday in observance of President's Day. That does not mean that your lobbyists will not be working. I expect lobbying members as well as myself to be here on Monday. We just may not be answering phone calls or emails as timely as you'd like to see. I hope all of you have a great Friday. Thank you for everything you do for your community and for the state at large. We appreciate your grassroots advocacy. It does work. It does matter. So thank you again. We hope you all have a great weekend.